have been sitting on this topic for a few weeks now, partially because I don't have the best video set up for recording right now, and mostly because of how incredibly upsetting this article was to me for a variety of reasons. But I mentioned it on my personal socials the other day and had a conversation with someone about this. And so I finally broke down and put my thoughts to virtual paper, and I'm hopefully prepared to talk about it. All right, so the most morally disgusting thing that I have read recently, anyway, most disgusting piece of supposedly scientific literature is this article that comes out of the so-called Department of Medical Ethics, Humanities, and Law at Western Michigan University. And this paper is called Beneficial Bloodsucking. And the TLDR is this paper indicates that we have a moral obligation to spread alpha-gal syndrome in order to morally prevent people from eating meat. Okay, so here we go. First of all, this paper starts with the claim that eating meat is morally wrong and that it is one of the best and most widely accepted ideas in applied ethics. So therefore, their assertion is that eating meat is wrong. Eating meat is widely morally accepted by those, I'm sorry, there is not eating meat is widely morally accepted, but that it's widely accepted that eating meat is morally wrong. I think I said all of that wrong. But it's widely accepted by those who have devoted their lives to the study of applied ethics. And they're saying that this should be the belief of all people all across the globe. Now, their justification for saying things like, we have an obligation to not eat meat, and that they have nothing to add to the argument as to why eating meat is wrong, so they're not going to add to it. And their biggest claim for this being accepted as morally wrong is this one study. And this study says that students eat less meat after studying the ethics of meat production. Now, if you can see this spot that I pre-highlighted, it said that after the students had their lessons on the ethics of meat production, 54% of students agreed that eating meat of factory farmed animals, not eating all meat, mind you, eating meat of factory farmed animals is unethical. Okay, so let's look at their study participants. It's always a great thing if you're looking at research to find out who did they study. Well, the participants were 944 students enrolled in 3 different introductory philosophy classes at the University of California, Riverside. So these are students who are going to college in California. 328 came from a Philosophy 1 Intro to Philosophy course, quite possibly a general studies course. 300 students were in Philosophy 2, Contemporary Moral Issues, and 316 were in Philosophy 5, a class called Evil. Also noted that Philosophy 5 was taught by one of the authors of this particular study. Okay, so if we look at those numbers, 35% of the participants were enrolled in an introductory philosophy course. The other 65% were in a higher level class, meaning they had already taken introductory philosophy, but even more importantly, in my opinion, if you are taking a level 2 or a level 5 philosophy class, then you're very interested in the topic, okay? 65% of the participants were in these higher level classes. And yet, only 54% felt that eating factory farm meat was unethical. Okay, so the authors from Beneficial Bloodsucking use that to say that it is widely accepted that eating meat in general, not factory farmed meat, mind you, but meat in general, is immoral. And because it is immoral, we have a moral obligation to prevent people from eating meat. Now, if you don't know, they are saying that alpha-gal syndrome is a great way to prevent people from eating meat. I mean, they're right, it is. Okay? If you're not familiar with alpha-gal syndrome, you probably live outside of the concentrated area of prevalence. So if you live in the United States, the alpha-gal prevalence map looks like this. So a little over a year ago, I was at the Missouri Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics meeting, and we had a speaker at our annual meeting, or their annual meeting, whichever way you want to say that, on the topic of alpha-gal. And I was texting with a friend and former colleague who lives in Arizona. So for those of us who don't know our geography well, this is Missouri, if you can see my cursor moving, and this is Arizona. So my colleague, a fellow registered dietitian, was like, okay, it doesn't sound so exciting. And so I had to explain to her what alpha-gal syndrome is and why dietitians in Missouri would care. Okay. Before I jump into it, if you're not familiar with what alpha-gal is, you're not off the hook if you are not an American. Okay, outside of the United States, all of those white countries, it's not that they don't particularly have alpha-gal. It's just that they don't necessarily know if they have alpha-gal. But all those red countries have at least 5 reported cases. 5 is a very small number, right? But at least 5. If we look at Australia, it is centered on the East Coast in the US. Look at that. That map looks amazingly like the one we just looked at for the United States. Okay, so why do we care? Well, because alpha-gal syndrome is a potentially life-threatening allergy to mammalian proteins, the meat of mammals, and often dairy. It's transmitted by the Lone Star tick and potentially some other ticks, mosquitoes, and chiggers. Now, alpha-gal is actually a disaccharide called galactose, alpha-1,3-galactose. And that crazy name tells us that there are 2 galactoses bonded together. The 1 and the 3 tell us which carbons on each galactose, and the alpha tells us what kind of bond, if we're going to dig deep into chemistry. Okay, so it is a disaccharide, 2 sugars bonded together. Now, we consume disaccharides in our diet. We consume sucrose, table sugar, and lactose, milk sugar. We don't, well, I guess we consume alpha-gal, but it's not nutritionally significant. It's not something that you would normally study in nutrition. And it is not something that we would make in our bodies. Humans don't make alpha-gal, but other mammals do. And when a tick bites a deer, for instance, and then it gets some deer blood and then it bites a human, it can transmit that alpha-gal disaccharide to that human. And when that alpha-gal gets into the bloodstream, the body sees it as a foreign object. And that starts this cascade reaction of allergic symptoms. And the person is going to have an allergic response similar to other allergies. Okay, so coming back, now that we know what alpha-gal is, they are saying that we should promote the spread of alpha-gal through ticks to people to reduce meat consumption, because eating meat is wrong. no one should eat it. Now, I am not going to take the time to pick apart their claims about whether eating meat is morally wrong or that it is a universally accepted idea that eating meat is wrong, because honestly, there are wonderful people on both sides of the argument. And my biggest concern is not with their discussion of whether or not it is morally wrong to eat meat. My biggest concern is with how they want to go about preventing it. Okay. So they claim that there is no harm in transmitting alpha gal. See if I can find that statement. Here we go. Importantly, there is little evidence that alpha gal syndrome is associated with potentially harmful conditions apart from those that are caused by eating meat. Our claim rests on the notion that alpha gal syndrome causes some harm to the person with the syndrome, such that they are motivated to refrain from eating meat. Okay, that is their only concern, I guess. It's not a concern. They're not concerned, but that is what they say. There is no harm aside from that, pesky little allergic reaction thing. Okay. Now, in case you're not familiar with alpha-gal, alpha-gal is a potentially anaphylactic or causes a potentially anaphylactic reaction. And if you're not familiar with anaphylaxis, it can happen from peanut allergies, bee stings. It can cause your throat to close. It can cause your heart to stop, right? It can cause death. But okay, sure, right? Let's just, take out the potential of anaphylaxis. It's still not a problem, right? Is what they're saying. Just don't eat milk. Or I'm sorry, don't eat meat. Quite possibly don't eat milk either. And that's a simple solution, right? Except that diagnosing alpha-gal syndrome can be extremely difficult. The reaction symptoms after consuming that mammalian product can be delayed. People sometimes won't have symptoms until 3 or 8 hours after they have consumed an offending food. The symptoms can also be general. The person might have diarrhea, nausea, vomiting. It can be things that don't necessarily trigger you to go to the doctor and seek out medical attention until it persists on and on and on. And even then, when people have persistent symptoms and they do go to the doctor, they may be suffering for years before doctors are able to put the puzzle pieces together and provide them with an accurate diagnosis. But even still, some people are not so lucky to obtain a diagnosis. Last fall, there was a report of the first person, right, documented the first known death from alpha-gal syndrome related to this ugly guy right here. Sorry if you're a tick lover, right? So 47-year-old pilot, he got sick a few hours, 4 hours after eating a hamburger at a barbecue. Okay? But prior to that, we're going to jump back in time. 2 weeks before he died, he had gotten sick from eating steak. He had a steak dinner. He got sick, abdominal pain, diarrhea, vomiting. Most of us would probably look at that and think, oh, I ate something bad, right? Well, obviously he did eat something bad. But most of us are going to think that, oh, I got a GI bug. I got some food poisoning, right? Well, he didn't really have an answer to what was causing it. And, it probably passed. Literally 2 weeks later, he was at a barbecue, had a burger. 4 hours later, he started feeling sick. And his son found him unconscious in the bathroom, surrounded by vomit. Friends, this was in 2024. And I'm assuming summertime, because when I think camping and when I think barbecues, I think summer. It doesn't tell us what time of year it was. They do tell us he was from New Jersey. So, I mean, I assume that some people do grill in the wintertime. But that means that in November of 2025, when they took samples from this man, it had been roughly a year and a half after he died before he had a diagnosis of alpha gal syndrome. And it was probably only because it was such a weird, rare, freak looking incident that someone dug deep. So this was reported to be the first person to have known to have died of alpha gal. How do we know that there haven't been others who died from alpha gal without having ever received a diagnosis? All right, so Crutchfield and Harif, they say there is no harm in spreading alpha gal syndrome via ticks. This means that people who enjoy the outdoors, right? They go hiking in the woods, they go camping, maybe they have pets and their pets get ticks on them, and then the ticks, come off and they end up biting the people. These people that are just enjoying life inadvertently become a meal for these ticks. And then they can end up with a potentially life-threatening allergy that can take months or even years to diagnose and then identify the need to avoid these mammalian products. But what if you do have that diagnosis? First of all, it's not just meat that needs to be avoided. Alpha gal can be present in beef casings, right? You may not even realize it's there. I know someone who had bought some turkey meat sticks because, most of them are beef and jerky is beef. So they bought some turkey meat sticks, didn't read the label carefully. It was in a beef casing, beef collagen casing. Okay. It can also be in magnesium stearate, a supplement that some people might be taking. And it can be found in carrageenan. This is an additive that is found in foods, and it will be found in vegetarian products. And people can have reactions to that. I was at a restaurant one day. We were talking with the waitress, and the waitress had a son who was sick for 7 years before getting diagnosed. And his alpha gal is so severe that he can't even eat sugar. Now, why? Why can't he eat sugar? Because if you're not aware of this, table sugar is refined using bone char. That's right. Bones, typically from cows, are used in the refining process for sugar. And that was enough for her son to have a reaction. I know somebody who has had a reaction after cooking chicken on a barbecue grill that had previously had meat cooked on it. So not only is it careful reading of labels, being careful of the foods in your own house, but what about cross contact when you're eating somewhere else, in restaurants or in someone else's kitchen? So many potential opportunities for having an adverse reaction. All right, so in this article, they conclude with a bunch of counterpoints to objections. There's this whole section on objections and replies, and they make counterpoints for all sorts of things. Once they get to the end, they conclude their article saying there is not a problem. They argue that alpha gal syndrome, this potentially deadly allergy, is a moral bioenhancer, and that its promotion is morally obligatory, that we need to spread alpha gal via ticks. Alpha gal is a moral bioenhancement. This means that if you have alpha gal syndrome, it enhances your morality by preventing your ability to eat meat with no significant negative effects on human health as long as one avoids eating meat. It's not a disease and can't be cured. Okay. So they do talk about spreading alpha gal with ticks and promoting this spread with ticks. So that leads us to the question of, can we do that? Can ticks be modified to spread alpha gal? Well, guess what? There are researchers looking at the genetic manipulation of ticks and how can we genetically modify them to have a gene, to not have a gene. Okay. There's a theory that Lyme disease came from either a lab leak or intentional contamination and transmission infection. However, the official response is that that theory has been debunked. Our government tells us that that is not true. It never happened. It is all made up. So, if you are sending your kids to Western Michigan University, or honestly, any number of other places of higher education in this country, you may be exposing them to professors of medical ethics who have zero qualms about infecting unsuspecting innocent people with potentially life-threatening allergies that require strict avoidance of foods and ingredients that are prevalent across our food system. Apparently, they have never heard of the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm. All because they and many others think that factory farmed meat production is unethical, and they think that any kind of meat consumption is unethical. Maybe instead of intentionally transmitting life threatening diseases to people, I'm sorry, it's not a disease, it can't be cured, life threatening allergies to people, maybe we improve our farms. Instead of having these large scale agricultural corporate farms, maybe we use regenerative farming methods, and maybe we improve our food supply.